afternoon. This is BBC News 24, broadcasting as well on BBC1. The time has just gone 4 o'clock. News 24 with Peter Dobby and Jane Hill. If you are just joining us, let us just remind you what has happened in the United States within the last couple of hours. The United States of America has this afternoon come under widespread terrorist attack. It all began, as we say, about 2 hours ago. 2 aircraft crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City. These are these initial pictures that we're showing you here. This is at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, British time. That's 9 a.m. New York time. Well, these 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers, as they're known, at the very heart of the World Trade Center in New York, the heart of the financial district. And as you can see, one of the towers subsequently collapsed. Around about half an hour or so later, that collapsed. There are many details to bring you this afternoon. One of those is to say that a third explosion then went off close to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon, of course, heart of the defense area. Reports are coming in as well of a 4th plane heading towards Washington, D.C., although this is not confirmed. There are alerts across the United States. Reports that a car bomb as well has exploded outside the State Department in Washington. And as you'll know, if you've been watching over the last hour or so, we've been bringing you reports that a plane has crashed as well north of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Many alerts, many evacuations across the United States of America within the last 2 hours. Our correspondent John Andrew has been taking a look at events in the United States so far.
The devastating series of attacks began shortly before 9 o'clock in New York. Eyewitnesses saw a plane hit one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center, packed with thousands of office workers. The first tower was well alight and smoking when minutes later a second plane came in low and hit the other tower. Seen again in slow motion, it's clear the aircraft is heading deliberately into the building. I don't know. On the ground, a scene of chaos and pandemonium.
Let's just get back. Get back.
What is it? They just think there's going to be another explosion. Frank?
A big explosion happened. Some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Our correspondent Steve Evans was in one of the twin towers when the first plane struck.
There was a huge bang. It felt to me like somebody dropped a skip full of rubbish, a great container full of rubbish from a very great height, in the yard which separates the 2 huge towers which are the World Trade Center. The building physically shook, but it's one of those things where you think, well, something's happened on a building site, that's the way it is. But seconds later, there were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of this building, at which point people came, I nearly said screaming. They weren't screaming. It was a mild panic, if you like. People simply saying, get out of here, get out of here. People streaming to the other side of the building. At which point, smoke appeared everywhere, as though a mist had suddenly settled on the building. We all streamed out, some people running, some people crying, nobody really screaming, across the road, and you look up, and you could see the top of one of the towers, smoke billowing out from it, the odd flame coming out from the top of these towers, pretty well the highest buildings in the world.
It's still far from clear how many people have been killed and injured, but the casualties are bound to be extensive. It's believed the 2 aircraft were hijacked from Boston and that the tragedy was the result of a suicide mission. Just as America was absorbing the enormity of these events, a 3rd plane hit the Pentagon in Washington, symbol of American military might. These and other government buildings, including the White House, have been evacuated. The 3rd attack hadn't even happened when President Bush was told of the New York attacks just before making an education speech in Florida.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
Later, one of the World Trade Center's twin towers collapsed into the street, followed later by the second. America's two tallest buildings wiped from the skyline.
I was just trying to make phone calls. I looked up and I heard an explosion, and then I saw everybody in the street react first. People crying, people on the ground, everybody lying down. And then I looked up and I saw this huge plume of smoke and the tower just crumbling, and it just turned into a huge plume of smoke, and next thing you know, there's smoke in one tower.
Here, Tony Blair abandoned his planned speech to the TUC after hearing of the tragedy.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
Today's shocking events amount to the most audacious terrorist attack ever carried out, with as yet no clear idea about which group was responsible. John Andrew, BBC News.
Well, just to update you on the very latest, a tremendous number of lives have been lost. That's a direct quote via the Reuters news agency from the Mayor of New York, Mayor Giuliani. These are the latest pictures. Those are pictures of the Pentagon. We understand that part of the Pentagon building has now collapsed, following on from the attack on that building. We also understand that Israeli army rescue teams are heading now for the United States. During that report from John Andrew, we also learned that the NATO Secretary General George Robertson has spoken about the events in the United States, saying that the multiple terrorist attacks, his words, not ours, in New York and Washington, underline the need for alliance forces to unite against terrorism. Also, to go back to that earlier story that we brought you about a plane crash in the United States, one news agency, it's unconfirmed, this report, they were originally saying that it was a crash involving a Boeing 767 in Pittsburgh, near Pittsburgh, about 80 miles away from Pittsburgh. That has now changed. The AFP news agency is now saying it is a jumbo, it's a 747. Let's put this unfolding story in context for you. Let's talk to one of our correspondents in Jerusalem, Orla Guerin. Orla, what's the reaction there today?
Well, there's been enormous shock. People have been watching the events unfolding with a sense of absolute horror. I should bring you up to date on a few specific developments within the last few moments. We've had condemnation from the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. He has described the attacks in the United States as completely unbelievable, absolutely shocking. Those are his words. And he said that the Palestinian people were sending their sympathy to the Americans. We know that the CIA has been in contact with the Israeli government, with the intelligence community here, seeking assistance, seeking any kind of information, any clues that they may have as to who could have been behind these attacks. Now, everybody is still feeling around in the dark, and there have been no credible claims of responsibility. But senior Israeli sources are attaching some importance to information that they have received. They claim that a credible threat was made about 3 weeks ago by the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden, that he would strike not only American interests but British interests as well. So they are attaching some importance to that claim, but really nobody can be sure at this point.
For us all, these reports from the news agencies in London that the Israeli army rescue teams are now heading for the United States.
Well, that's right. Israel is always very quick in these circumstances to offer assistance. It has a sorry and sad and long experience of dealing with the aftermath of terrorist attacks, of car blasts, of suicide bombings. Never, we have to say, on anything like this kind of scale, but there are highly experienced personnel in the Israeli Defense Force, in the IDF, a lot of medics with specialist training, rescue teams with specialist training. They were deployed most recently after the Indian earthquake a very long large team was sent there and gave considerable assistance. So Israel is anxious to do whatever it can, but it is also concerned now at this point about possible threats to its own interests. We know that an instruction has gone out from the Israeli Foreign Ministry that all Israeli embassies are to be evacuated. We understand that evacuation has already taken place in London. So there is still a sense of great concern here, obviously deep sympathy for the United States, but a lingering worry that perhaps there may be implications here for Israel as well.
Is there a sense there, it's afternoon here, it must be early evening with you, is there a sense there that everyone on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side really just wants to keep a lid on this because it may not be over yet?